Happy Sabbath, and thank you for having me again. I guess I've been here once before, I think, and I usually talk about creation, and I did the science of miracles, I think, last time, but I thought I'd try something different this time. I've given this talk once before, but it's really something that's gotten a lot closer to me over the last year or so, because we had this week of prayer where the cousin of Lee Vinden, who's the son of Morris Vinden, came out, and his name is Gary Vinden, and he gave a talk on righteousness by faith, a whole week-long series. And it really impressed me, and my wife used to always come and ask me, that she felt that she wasn't going to go to heaven. And this changed her mind, that it's not your job to make yourself better or savable, it's God's job to do it. And so I started thinking about this and how we get so confused and think that we can actually do it ourselves. And I thought I'd put together my own little talk on All About Jesus. It was called All About Jesus Seminar. It's really good. You can see it on YouTube if you want to look it up, by Gary Vinden or Lee Vinden as well. But this is my own kind of version of that topic. And it's called Though He Slay Me. And it takes us back to, when Abraham was asked to offer Isaac, what was going through his mind. And same with Job, though he slay me. So I'm just thinking to myself, doing things our own way throughout the Bible, if you read the whole Bible from beginning to end, there's a lot of examples and illustrations of people trying to do things their own way. And in my own life as well, it never, ever goes well. Right? Ever. And so in Proverbs it says there's a way that appears to be right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. So what seems to you be the right path never ever is the right path, right? If it's going against what God says is the right path. And it's kind of like what's called the butterfly effect. There's this effect in physics and science that's called the butterfly effect. It basically that you cannot predict the future because not knowing one tiny little variable can change the entire future, right? If you don't know every little detail, you can never get the future right. Because even something as tiny and insignificant as a butter flapping its wings 10 years ago in Bermuda somewhere can make a hurricane in Florida 10 years later. That's unpredictable, right? How are you going to predict the future unless you know everything in perfect detail? And this butterfly effect is becoming a really powerful idea in physics, that there's no way that humans can predict much of anything, even a short distance out into the future, because of this butterfly effect. Certainly not in detail. That's why the weathermen can never get things right? So, because how do you know which tiny little branch on the tree you're going to end up on? There's just no way you can figure that out unless you know every single detail. And so it's like playing, just as an illustration, I play chess. I used to think I was pretty good, and because I could beat everybody around me at some point. And then I ended up playing chess online, and I was doing pretty well. And then I came across a grandmaster, and he beat me so badly that I figured that chess is not my career. You can make more than $1 million a year playing chess if you're actually a grandmaster, but certainly wasn't my path. But chess is a deceptively simple game. It's an 8x8 square board, 8 little squares across, 8 little squares up, and there's 32 pieces. And you're like, well, this is a tiny little board. How hard can it be, right? Well, it's very, very difficult to master because there's 10 to the power of 130 different possible chess games. It's finite, but it's 10 to the power of 130. Now, to get an idea of that number, there's 10 to the 80th atoms in the whole universe, right? So I was trying to talk to a friend of mine about how to explain this. He said, it's like if, let's say, every single grain of sand in the Sahara Desert was a universe. Each grain of sand was a universe. There'd still be more possible chess games than that, right? So it's hard to master, get your mind wrapped around it. So again, here's the 10 to the 130. That's how many chess games. So now, when you're thinking about the universe itself, it's much bigger than an 8 by 8 square board, right? And all the pieces are moving at the same time. How are you going to predict that, right? If you can't even handle chess, and I know you can't. Well, I made the mistake last time I gave this talk. I said I could beat everybody in the church at chess. So I'm not going to quite say that. I could probably beat all of you at chess. But there happened to be a Russian grandmaster who had won the junior chess champion title for Russia in the audience that day. And so later on, he challenged me to a game of chess that Sabbath night, and he was playing really fast, and I lucked out and I beat him. But that was total luck. I just tell you. But anyway, but if I can't do it, and I'm pretty good at chess, and I'm an idiot at chess, let me tell you, and I could beat all of you. What does that mean about all of you? You're all idiots too, right? We're all idiots together, and we just don't. If we can't handle a simple game of chess against a human grandmaster, what do we think we can do about our own lives that are way more complex than a simple game of chess? And so how good do you think you are, right, at managing your own life? Do you think you can really achieve success if you can't succeed at a simple game of chess against a human grandmaster? What it turns out, to me anyway, is that we need some outside help to win at our own game of life. How are you going to win? You can't do it by yourself. For sure you can't do it. Every single choice you make on your own fails. And what's interesting about a game of chess is that it looks right. What appears good to man, right? It looks like a good move. But a tiny little inaccuracy in the game of chess can ruin the whole game, right? So a tiny little inaccuracy in your own life can make everything go to spades in your own life, right? So you can't, unless you know how to do it perfectly, you're going to fail in your own life. So, again, we're not just playing against humans here either. It says in Ephesians 6:12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms." Right? Now, how good do you think you really are? Do you think you can beat somebody who is a huge amount smarter than you are? And if you can't even beat a simple game of chess, if you can't even beat me, right? How good do you think you really are? And so God gives us some advice on how to do this in the Bible. He says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths." Right? So let's say I'm playing a grandmaster, or I'm playing somebody in chess who's a lot better than I am, some sort of world champion. Carl Magnuson, he's number one right now. Let's say I'm playing him. I'm going to get beat for sure, right? So let's say that there's a grandmaster whispering in my ear the right moves, and I happen to win, right? Who gets the credit for that if someone told me how to win? Do I get the credit? No, right? It's the grandmaster who is whispering the right moves into my ear that gets the credit. The same thing happens with God. When he whispers the right moves into our ear, if we listen to God and we do the right moves and we succeed in life and we become a success and we make it to heaven someday, who gets the credit? God does, right? But then he turns around and says to you, "Good job, my good and faithful servant," right? And we're like, well, it doesn't really sound fair, but, I'll take it, right? And but that's what it's all about. It says, "Yet we are tempted to think all the time that we finite, short-lived humans consistently think that our conclusions are the best moves to take." Why do we do this, right? Why do we consistently tempted to do this? Every time you think you know the right answer and it's against what you have been told is the right answer by the grandmaster whispering into your ear, the best that you can do is delay God's plans for your life. That's the best that you can do. So, but it's a natural human condition. Started out early on. In Genesis, it says, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some of the fruit to eat, and I ate it." Seemed like a good idea at the time, right? And look what happened. It kind of destroyed the world. That one little simple, I think I got it, I don't need God's advice here. I'll do it on my own. And then, and again in Genesis, said, you've got Isaac and Rebekah, right? And Rebekah tells Jacob, her son, to go and steal the birthright blessing from Isaac. And she says, and the son says, well, that would be lying, and I would get cursed, right? And then Rebekah says, let the curse fall on me. And it did. After Jacob left home, she never, ever saw him again, right? She died before he got to come back, and she never saw him again. And it ruined her life. It ruined Jacob's life. Even when you come back to God, like Jacob came back to God, at this point, he was really sorry, and God forgave him and changed his name. You know, Jacob means deceiver, right? But then he changed his name when he wrestled with Christ. He changed his name to Israel, which means victorious, or the victor with God. And so he changed his name, but what happened the rest of Jacob's life? He was always plagued by deception. He was deceived with regard to Leah. He was deceived with regard to Joseph. He just could never get out from under that deception problem. Because even when God forgives you, he cannot always take away all of the consequences of our actions. So it's good to try to follow God to begin with and avoid these consequences. Same thing happened with Abraham. It says, Abram agreed to what Sarah said when she said, you need to take Hagar to have this son of promise. And we're still paying for it today, right? It's because we have this big Middle East problem right now. I mean, it just never goes away. And you're like, well, what would have happened if Abram had just trusted God to begin with and not tried to do it on his own? And the best thing that can happen is it makes a mess today, right? And then Moses, he tried to do it on his own too. He killed the Egyptian who was beating the Hebrew, and he said, who made you ruler and judge over us? When they tried to break up another fight between two Hebrews. And then, of course, Moses had to run for his life and wait 40 years tending sheep, where he probably could have done it a lot sooner. But no, he had to wait and learn patience and learn God's methods before he could go back and lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And again, it's a delay. It's a delay from God's original plan A, and now you have to go plan B, C, D, all the way to double Z or triple Z or whatever, you know? And when it would have been a lot quicker and better the first time. And it delayed the same thing, 40 years wandering in the desert. The Israelites were supposed to go over quickly, and take over Canaan quickly. But they said, the 12 spies came back, and 10 of them said, we're too small, these are giants in the land, we feel like grasshoppers, etc., etc., there's no way we can do it. And so then that put doubts in everybody's mind. There's no way we can do it. And so then God said, fine, you're not going to go. And they're like, oh, we can do it. And so they went over without God's guidance, and they got slaughtered, right? And so it's really a strange human condition where when God tells you you can do something, you don't think you can. And when God tells you you can't do something, then you think you can, right? It's really bizarre. And so where do we get this from? And then you see in Samuel, make us a king. And then God says, this is not a good idea. Making a king will delay things, right? It'll probably delay the coming of the Messiah. You have rejected me and my prophets and my leadership, my chosen forms of leadership, to accept a customary idea of a king, right? It's just going to mess things up, guys. You don't want a king. And they said, no, we want a king. And so he gives them a king, and it messed everything up, right? It probably delayed the Messiah, who knows how long. It delayed the coming of the Messiah. And David, he had everything handed to him by God. God took him from being a shepherd boy to giving him the kingship of Judah and of Israel. And then he murders and commits adultery all in the same shot. And God came to him and said, look, if all of that I had given you had been too little, I would have given you even more, right? Why did you do this stupid thing? And leave the path that I had lined out for you. And it ruined David's life. Even though David came back to God and he didn't lose salvation because he came back to God, God forgave him, it did ruin the rest of his life. He lost his children over this, and it was a great pain for the rest of his life, this particular. He also lost moral authority. It was hard for him to govern after this point. Even his own family, it was hard for him to govern because they could always point back at him and say, look what you did. How can you be preaching at me, given what you did? And so it messed up his life doing this, even though God forgave him. And part of the result of this was Solomon. And Solomon started out good, but then he took a nosedive, and he said, so Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, this is just not a little bit of evil. This is a major evil, right? Let me show you. I was trying to explain to my boys this morning what's going on here. You know, Solomon built shrines to Moloch and Chemosh. Part of the shrine to Moloch was sacrificing children in the fire, burning them alive, right? And he probably sacrificed his own children to Moloch. That's unbelievable, right? And also it's unbelievable that God can forgive something like that. But Solomon came back to the Lord, and he was forgiven, but it ruined Israel after that. Who knows how long things were delayed because of Solomon and all that he did. He just could not bring Israel back into repentance. In fact, it was so bad that King Solomon is not really the direct ancestor of Christ. He was removed from direct ancestry, and it went through a different son of David, became the ancestor of Mary. Solomon was the ancestor of Joseph, but not of Mary, because of this particular event that happened, that he left so badly that he was removed from ancestry of at least the direct line of Christ. Also, if you look at Hezekiah would have been much better off if he had just gone along with God's plan and just ended it right there when he got ill. But no, he cried and complained, and he kind of got really weepy about it and just said, no, God, I don't think this is fair, and I kind of demand healing, right? I don't, this is not right. You have to heal me, basically. And so God said, fine. He sent back the prophet and said, I'll heal you, and I'll give you 15 more years. If he hadn't got those 15 years, he'd probably be one of the handful of people, there's like 3 in the Bible, where nothing bad is mentioned about them, right? Like, Daniel is one of them that comes to mind. Nothing as bad is mentioned. And Hezekiah could have been one of those people. But he ruined those 15 years, right? Messed things really. He brought Babylon in and showed him all his treasures instead of talking about God, right? And it messed things up. And it messed up. And it showed more of his character, because it says, oh, it's okay that Babylon's going to come and take everything because at least I'll be dead by then, right? So it showed more of his character at that point. Also Peter, he said to Christ, you don't have to die on the cross. You can get around this some other way. This isn't going to happen to you. So Jesus said to him, get behind me, Satan, because Peter's tempting Christ not to go through with the plan that God had set before him. Again, we just have no idea of the proper ways to play the game. In fact, in chess, sometimes to win the game, you have to sacrifice your major pieces, even your queen, right? You have to sacrifice in order to win. Now, Jesus was saying here, not my will, but yours. He was saying, is there any other option here? And God's like, not if you want to win the game, right? And what was winning for Christ? We'll get a little bit more into this, but just think about it. What's winning for Christ? And Martha said, hey, if you had been here, my brother Lazarus wouldn't have died. But Martha didn't understand that if Christ had been there, one of the greatest miracles in the Bible couldn't have happened, right? She just didn't understand. She doesn't know how to play the game because she doesn't know all the pieces involved and how they're moving and the proper way to play. You got to leave it up to God. And of course, there's other examples in the Bible of doing things the right way. And Job comes to mind right away. It's the title of the sermon. His wife says, why don't you just curse God and die? All these bad things are happening. Clearly God doesn't care about you anymore. Why don't you just curse God and die? But Job responds, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Right? And it's because Job said that God could turn to the universe and say, look, here's an illustration of somebody who loves me no matter what. And it was able to give God a power play and say, hey, look, this is what devotion is really like. And this is my man Job. He is perfect. How many of you can be that God can point to you and say, this is my servant Sean, he's perfect? Right? I don't think so. But he said that about Job. He's perfect in all his ways. Because Job decided he wasn't going to play the game himself. He's going to do what God said exactly. And Abraham also Abraham had some spectacular failures, but he also had some spectacular successes. And this is the most spectacular, saying that he was going to sacrifice his only son, the son of promise. And of course, he thought maybe that God would resurrect him or something. He didn't know how God was going to work out his promise. He knew that God had promised that through Isaac, his nation would be great. And so Abraham had no idea how God was going to work this out, but he had learned over time that every time he did things his own way, things went south, right? So this time he was going to follow God no matter what, and it was a spectacular success, right? It's because of this that he is the father of all of those of us who have faith in God. Also Joseph. Nothing much as bad is mentioned about Joseph either. He's pretty spectacular his whole life, except maybe he was a little bit ornery as a young guy. As a teenager, he wasn't so bright when he was dealing with his older brothers. But beyond that, once he made it into Egypt, pretty much nothing bad is said about him. And so he said, how then could I do this wicked thing and sin against God? Now, a lot of people think, well, this was just a power play. It wasn't much of a temptation. But I think it was a real temptation. I think that Potiphar's wife was probably young and probably pretty good looking. And she probably had some other plans set up for Joseph, saying, hey, look, we can bump Potiphar off. I can make you in charge of the guard. Because, the inheritance and stuff in that culture went through the women, right? She was probably the daughter of some high-ranking noble or priest. And she probably promised to set Joseph up, right? Who knows? But Joseph said, no, I'm going to stick with God on this one. And he knew he was either going to die or go to prison, right, when doing this. And in fact, he would have died if Potiphar had have actually believed his wife. But because Potiphar did not believe his wife, he sent Joseph to prison instead of killing him. And so Joseph ends up in prison for a number of years over that, but then he had no idea how the game was going to play out at that point. And it was spectacular. God took that and used it and made Joseph's dreams come true beyond his wildest imagination. Then you have Samuel talking about David. And David had multiple chances. Again, David has spectacular failures like with Uriah and Bathsheba and all that, but he also has some spectacular successes following God, because he had a lot of chances to kill King Saul directly, and he refused to touch the Lord's anointed because he was the Lord's anointed. Let God handle it. God promised I would be king. I'm going to trust him and just go with that. However he works it out. And if David had have actually killed Saul, it would have made things much more politically complex for him as becoming king over Israel and Judah. The three worthies in fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, our God is able to deliver us, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. And so they knew that their lives were either over or God would have to perform some spectacular miracle to save them, which would be pretty cool. It said, Ellen White says that in thinking about this and making this little final speech before the king Nebuchadnezzar, that they kind of got excited. Either way, it was going to be really cool what was about to happen, right? Either way. And so when you put yourself in God's hands, you know something cool, even if it's difficult, something really cool, unusual, and certainly not boring is going to happen in your life, right? So Here's Christ. Remember, he says, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Now, victory. God said, the Father said to Jesus, if you want victory in this game, this is what you have to do. The cup cannot be taken away. What was victory? What was the hope set before Christ? It wasn't necessarily his resurrection, because it says that he could not see through the portals of the tomb. He was willing to die and be separated from the Father eternally, right? So for what? Us. We are the victory. Our salvation was a hope set before him, and because he was shown our salvation and our glory in heaven, that he was saying, that's victory for me, right? So that's why he went through it and sacrificed himself. So why are we even tempted not to trust God, given all these examples in the Bible and even in our own life, if you've tried it yourself? And what he tells us to do and what he promises to do for us. Because says in Isaiah, before they call, I will answer. While they're still speaking, I will hear. He's got things set up for you if you will just go along with his plan. It says, and we know that all things work together for good for them that love God. Even when it seems mysterious, it seems illogical, irrational. Well, so does chess if you don't know what you're doing, right? You're sacrificing pieces here, there, and everywhere, and it looks like you're going to lose. But if you really know what you're doing, you're actually winning. But the other person thinks that they're winning, and they're going to lose. Satan thinks he's winning, that he's going to lose, right? And you can be part of it. To them who are called according to his purpose, he's got you set up. Even though it may look really dark and foreboding right now, things are coming along that are going to blow your mind, right? It says perhaps because some of us don't have enough practical experience trusting God. You need to actually test it for yourself to see if it actually works for you. The Bible even says this. You think this is kind of presumptuous, but in Malachi it says, test me in this. This is referring to tithes and offerings in particular. You can actually do an experiment, a scientific, testable, potentially falsifiable experiment. It says, see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much of a blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Now I've tried it both ways in my life, doing tithe, not doing tithe, when I was younger especially. And it is miraculous that when you pay tithe, you get way more, and also a lot less things destroy your life. I mean, take it away from you. It's like if you have a lot of money but you're putting it in a bag with holes, what good is it, right? So God stops up the holes, and he even helps with the more money so that you're even more blessed to be a blessing to others around you. If you use God's money for God's work, it just is always there, right? And it's not just money. There's health, there's talent, there's a lot of other things that God gives to you as he knows he can trust you with these things. So you can test it, try it out, see if it works. It doesn't mean that your life will be perfect or that you'll be a multimillionaire, at least not yet, right? But you'll see that God's actions in your life as perfect when you are one day shown as he now sees your situation. A lot of people pray and they complain. Well, why didn't you heal this sickness? Or why didn't you answer my prayer like I asked for this miracle or that miracle or the finances in my life? Why, right? Well, it's because you just don't know how to play the game, right? You don't know what you're doing. It says, Ellen White, I like this passage in Prophets and Kings. She says, he, or God, never leads us otherwise than we would choose to be led if we could see the end from the beginning and discern the glory of the purpose that we are fulfilling, right? A lot of people, there's glory actually in struggles. What kind of glory do you have in your life if you've never experienced any struggles or suffering or challenges, right? I like to tell Marquis de Lafayette, I don't have the slide, but he was a English or French nobleman who came and helped during the Revolutionary War. And he got wounded a couple times. His horse was shot out from under him, and he was very valiant and brave. And when he came back home after the war, his wife thought he was so sexy that she fainted when she saw him. I was like, oh, well, maybe I should try something like that. Right? But that's how God views us. He's like, man, my servant Job went through all of that for me. That's just really warms God's heart, you know? When you're able to do something noble and spectacular, even though it's difficult and trying in your life. Somebody went through a difficult illness maybe, or cancer, but they did it with flying colors. When you get to heaven, your reward is going to be great, right? You went through it as a Christian, trusting in God no matter what, right? And that's going to be worth if you get military badges for military service and great bravery under fire, and you get wounded, and you get all these decorations, the Medal of Honor, just imagine what you're going to get in heaven for doing similar things, having gone through the battle, and this is a real battle, gone through in the war of this world. And when you get to heaven, there are going to be badges of honor for people who've gone through this with God's care and help. As a personal story, I'll just tell you a little bit about my grandfather, my father's father. Here he is in an airplane, World War II airplane. My grandfather, here he is with my grandmother when he was young. And he paid for his own medical school. He was a surgeon by buying old cars, fixing them up, and selling them. And then when down to South America, he had enough money to create a trucking business down there in order to help build hospitals and schools. And he would fly around in that airplane. He brought over a World War II pilot, a Czech pilot, to fly it for him. He had 2 airplanes, Model Ts, to help him fly around to the different hospitals and clinics down there. He was really entrepreneurial, very successful in everything he did. And he helped establish quite a number, dozens of hospitals and clinics and schools in South America. And then this is my father, the little boy right there, chubby little thing. And this is the last picture of my dad with his dad. Here is my grandfather's grave in Vinto in South America and Bolivia. And my father there standing with his grave, because when my father was 4 years old, my grandfather was flying along in that airplane, and they got trapped in a blind-end canyon, took a wrong turn. And they crashed in that canyon, and they was killed when my dad was 4 years old. And of course now there's a college named after him, Colegio Adventista Harry Pitman. And they have a marching band, and they have a soccer team that they do really well down there. This is the teachers at the university now. And Harry Pitman, they spelled the name wrong, but anyway, the last name has 1 T, but that's the school. Well, that's one of the schools he helped set up, and it's still named after him. And so this is, I'll just read you what my dad wrote. My dad wrote a book recently, and this is what he wrote about his father. He says, I only have a few fuzzy memories about my father, yet his early death and a big lifelong impact, or it had a big lifelong impact on me. In this life, we may never know the answers or understand the reasons why God allows such tragedies to happen, especially to those who seem to be serving him so well in the prime of their lives. Yet I have learned to trust God with such things, knowing that he loved my father and has always loved and taken care of me and my family, and has given me the assurance that all will be well, that I will one day see my father again and tell him all the stories that he missed, and introduce him to my own sons and grandsons. Such an assurance is truly one of the greatest gifts that God can give each one of us in this life. So, also, this is not going to continue. This experiment with sin is going to be the only one. It says, what do you imagine against the Lord? Once he wins his final victory, that'll be it. He will make an utter end. Affliction will not rise a second time. And Ellen White talks about this passage. He says, the whole universe will become a witness to the nature and result of sin and its utter extermination which in the beginning would have been brought fear to the angels and dishonor to God, will now vindicate his love and establish his honor before the universe of beings who delight to do his will and in whose heart is his law. Never will evil again be manifest. Says the word of God, affliction shall not rise a second time. The law of God, which Satan has reproached as the yoke of bondage, he called the law of God a yoke of bondage. You can't do this, you can't do that. It will be honored as the law of liberty. A tested and proved creation will never again be turned from allegiance to him whose character has been fully manifest before them as fathomless love and infinite wisdom. So what does this all mean in short? In other words, God is going to win, right? And you can too, right? If you let him. And what are you really giving up anyway? What are you trading besides failure, right? You do it on your own, you're going to fail. It's also not going to be as fun in the long run, right? So it's actually quite fun and entertaining to be on God's side. I can tell you many, many stories about doing it God's way, and it ends up being really cool. So my boys there for a while weren't so sure if God liked them, but they're pretty sure that I liked them, right? They have confidence in my love for them. I mean, who else takes them on parasailing and stuff in Hawaii or whatever? You know, this was just last year we got to do this, but it's like sometimes we doubt God's love for us, like my own boys, because we haven't tried it out, tested it out. But God is the one who sent Jesus to sacrifice himself for us, and he's the one who enables us to be good. You're not going to be, I ask my boys when they're in trouble, it's like, when you're bad, do you think that I don't love you anymore? When I have to give you a punishment or something, do you think that removes my love from you? No, we're pretty sure you still like us, right? And it's the same thing with God. When we do bad things, do you think that removes God's love from us? It doesn't. In fact, it's not our fault. The bad things that we do are natural to us. It says, can an Ethiopian change his skin or a leopard its spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to do evil. You can't do good. It's impossible for you. I like this little cartoon where the leopard is on the psychiatrist's couch, and the psychiatrist says, you have to want to change, right? You can't even want to change, right? We're so bad that we can't even want to be good, right? It's God who gives us the will and the ability to follow him. Nothing that we can do of ourselves can generate our spots being removed. It's entirely God's responsibility, and he said he will do it. And so he says in Philippians, be confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. And I don't really like this last phrase. It says, until the day of Christ Jesus. Why can't I be completed now? Right? Why can't I be perfect right now? I mean, why do I have to go through all this mess for the rest of my life until the day of Christ, until Christ returns? I think the temptation would be, though, if he made some of us perfect right now, is that we would think that we did it, right? The temptation is, well, I'm so good, you know. It's like Nebuchadnezzar, look at this kingdom that I have built with my great power and my wisdom and blah, 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 and he didn't give credit to God, right? And so sometimes God has to gradually lead you along so that each step of the way you realize who's leading you along, right? It's not you, it's not your wisdom, it's not your specialness, right? God has done everything for you and he gets all the credit. He's the grand master, right? You have made no moves. So it's kind of like, don't look at me. Keep going, keep moving on. If there's anything good that you've seen in me, like, man, you're half human today, you know? Well, thank God, right? Praise God. Look to him. He's the one who makes you at all act like a normal human being, right? Otherwise, you're just an animal, right? So if there's any light that shines out of you, praise God and turn other people's minds to God. He said, let your light shine. That's not a bad thing. We should let our light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds, but not glorify you, but glorify your Father, which is in heaven. Right? So this is the hope that we have. that we have victory that's given to us, that doesn't belong to us, but we get to enjoy. And so when we get to heaven, God's just going to give us a big hug and say, well done. Thank you for not just making it here, but choosing me, for loving me and letting me work with you and perfect your life and giving you everything you ever desired. So this is what I look forward to, and happy Sabbath. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much again for the Sabbath day and coming together and just thinking a little bit about all that you've done for us, the plans that you have for us, that we can't do it on our own. We're entirely dependent upon you, but you're more than willing to help. You've gone the extra mile. You came to us. We didn't come to you. You sacrificed yourself. We haven't sacrificed for you. And we thank you so much for your promise to fix us and make us into something beautiful and to be with you forever and ever. And that our life with you can start now, that our little piece of heaven and our glory can start now. And thank you so much. Forgive us of our sins. In Jesus' name, amen.